We're already on the trip. We only invited people who actually matter. Just send over the beach house keys. Don't make a scene. That was my stepmother, Diane, calling from my beach house, the one my late father left me, telling me I wasn't family enough to be invited to my own family vacation. I smiled. I hung up. 3 days later, I did send the keys, tucked inside a sealed envelope, and when Diane opened it at a charity gala in front of 85 guests, she screamed so loud the string quartet stopped playing. But what was inside that envelope? And why it made a 58-year-old woman lose everything she'd spent 4 years stealing? That's the part I need to tell you from the beginning. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe. But only if you genuinely connect with this story. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. My name is Abigail Vance. I'm 34 years old. I'm a landscape architect in Massachusetts. And this is the story of how I almost lost my father's house and found my own voice instead. Now let me take you back to a Tuesday morning in late June, the day the phone call changed everything. Before I can explain the envelope, you need to understand what Whitecrest means to me. Whitecrest is a shingle-style house perched on a bluff in Truro, Cape Cod, overlooking the Atlantic. 4 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, and a view that makes you forget you have a phone. Harborline Associates appraised it at $6.8 million in January of 2024, but to me, it was never about the number. It was about the man who bought it. My father, Raymond Vance, was an estate attorney with a quiet practice in Hyannis and the kind of handshake that made people trust him before he said a word. He purchased Whitecrest in 2003, when I was 11, 2 years after my mother lost her battle with ovarian cancer. The house was supposed to be a fresh start. And for a while, it was. Every summer, Dad and I would repaint the fence posts, replace the warped porch boards, and sit outside with his rolled-up blueprints, while he quizzed me on load-bearing walls and dormer angles. That porch is where I decided to become an architect. That porch is where my father became my best friend. Then he remarried. Diane Ashford came into our lives when I was 18 and already packing for Boston University. She was polished, articulate, and very good at making my father feel needed. Meredith, their daughter, arrived a year later. And slowly, so slowly I almost didn't notice, every time I came home to Whitecrest, I felt less like a daughter and more like a guest. Dad used to say something that I never fully understood until much later. "This house is yours, Abby. I've made sure of that on paper." I thought he was just being sentimental. I'd never once read his will. 2 weeks after his funeral, Diane changed the locks. She said it was for security. I told myself it was just a lock. But looking back, it was the first door she closed on me. The locks were only the beginning. Over the next 4 years, Diane dismantled my place in the family the way you'd remove a stain from fabric. Patiently, methodically, until no trace remained. Thanksgiving 2021. 5 months after Dad passed. Diane told me the gathering was too small, just immediate family processing grief. I found out later there were 14 people at the table, including Diane's sister and 2 neighbors I'd never met. Christmas 2022, I was invited, but seated at a folding card table near the kitchen while Meredith's friends filled the dining room. I carved the turkey. I served the pie. No one thanked me. Then there was the group chat. Our family iMessage thread, Vance Family, had existed since 2019. In September of 2022, I noticed I'd stopped receiving messages. When I asked Diane, she laughed softly. "Oh, we started a new one for planning. Must have been a glitch." There was no glitch. There was no invitation to the new thread either. But the part that kept me tethered, the part I'm almost embarrassed to admit, was the charity. The Raymond Vance Coastal Preservation Fund was established in Dad's name 3 months after he died. Its mission was to fund shoreline restoration along Cape Cod, something Dad had championed his entire career. I wanted to honor him, so I contributed $2,000 a month, every month, without fail. $24,000 a year. I sent the money under my own name, but when the fund's annual report came out each December, my contributions appeared under a single line, the Ashford Vance family. My name was nowhere. I was sending $24,000 a year into a fund that carried my father's name. I had no idea where that money was actually going. I wouldn't find out for another 18 months. And when I did, it changed everything. Tuesday, June 25th, 2:07 in the afternoon. I remember the time because I was staring at my desk clock, trying to talk myself out of making the call. Every summer, the Vance family spent a week at Whitecrest. Every summer, I tried to coordinate my project schedule around it. And every summer for 4 years, I'd ended up alone, uninvited, or invited too late, or told the dates had shifted. But I kept trying, because trying was all I had left of belonging. Diane picked up on the third ring. I heard waves. I heard laughter. Meredith's, high and careless somewhere nearby. I heard ice clinking in a glass. "We're already on the trip," Diane said, her voice breezy, as though she were declining a telemarketer. "We only invited people who actually matter." A pause. Then lower. "Just send over the beach house keys. Don't make a scene." I didn't speak for several seconds. In the background, Meredith said something I couldn't make out, and both of them laughed. Then Diane added, almost as an afterthought, "And while we're at it, Marcus is drafting something for you to sign. It's about the house. It's time we made things official, Abigail. Your father would have wanted the whole family to share it." She hung up before I could respond. I sat in my studio with my hands flat on the desk, my chest tight, my vision slightly blurred. Then I opened my email. There it was, sent 45 minutes before the call. From Marcus Bentley, attorney at law. A voluntary quitclaim deed, transferring sole ownership of Whitecrest to the Ashford Vance Family Trust. Signature deadline, 10 days. My father's signature was in his will, leaving me that house. And someone was asking me to erase it. That's when I picked up the phone again. Not to call Diane, but to dial a number I'd saved in my contacts for 4 years and never once used. Thomas Calloway, my father's oldest friend. Thomas Calloway's office sat on a quiet side street in Hyannis, above a nautical bookshop that smelled like cedar and salt. I was there by 2 o'clock the next afternoon, June 26th, sitting across from a 61-year-old man with silver hair, reading glasses on a chain, and the kind of steady calm that told me he'd been expecting this call for a long time. "Your father asked me not to reach out first," Thomas said, sliding a manila folder across the desk. "He said you'd come when you were ready." Inside was a certified copy of Raymond Vance's last will and testament, amended March 15th, 2021, 3 months before he died. I'd been given a copy at the reading, but I'd never studied it closely. Grief does that. You file things away and tell yourself you'll read them later, and later turns into years. Thomas guided me to the section on Whitecrest. The language was unambiguous. The property was bequeathed solely to Abigail Elaine Vance, free and clear. Not marital property. Not trust eligible. Mine. Then he turned to a clause I'd never noticed. Article 14.3, the forfeiture provision. It read, in part, "Should any beneficiary or related party be proven to have misappropriated, fraudulently transferred, or misused any asset within this estate, including any charitable fund bearing the testator's name, that party's entire inheritance share shall be forfeited and redirected to the preservation fund under the executor's management." I read it twice. Then I looked at Thomas. "Your father designed this as a safety lock," he said. He knew Diane. He didn't trust her with the finances. But he also didn't want a war before there was proof. Thomas paused, removed his glasses, and met my eyes. "I'm the executor, Abigail. I have the legal authority to activate that clause. But I need evidence. Real, documented evidence." "Your father didn't leave you unprotected," he said quietly. "He just trusted you'd find your way here when you were ready." I left that office holding a folder that felt heavier than it looked, and for the first time in 4 years the weight wasn't grief. It was possibility. Thomas made one phone call, and Nina Aldridge was in my life by Thursday morning. Nina was 37, a forensic accountant who'd spent 6 years at the Massachusetts Attorney General's office before going independent. She had a shaved undercut, tortoiseshell glasses, and a way of looking at spreadsheets the way most people look at crime scenes, with focus, patience, and a total absence of sentiment. Thomas hired her on my behalf for $8,500, which I paid out of savings. It was the most expensive thing I'd ever bought that didn't have walls. Between June 27th and June 30th, Nina pulled 3 years of financial records from the Raymond Vance Coastal Preservation Fund. What she found made me sit down. $340,000 had been disbursed under line items labeled event management fees and consulting services. The vendors listed were either non-existent or traceable to a single-shell LLC, Ashford Creative, registered in Delaware in August of 2022. The sole member of that LLC was Meredith Vance. The money flowed from the fund into Ashford Creative's account, then straight into Meredith's personal Wells Fargo checking account. 17 separate transactions over 28 months. And my $24,000 a year? Logged in the fund's donor records under the Ashford Vance family. My name. Erased. Nina compiled a 47-page report, notarized on July 7th, with copies of the LLC filing, bank transaction histories obtained legally through a subpoena Thomas secured as executor, and a 1-page summary timeline mapping every dollar to every date. "The paper trail is clean, Abigail," Nina told me, squaring the pages on her desk. "They weren't even careful. They didn't think anyone would look. $340,000. Every cent traceable. But I didn't go to the police. I didn't call Diane, because Thomas told me there was a better way. And it started with a gala invitation that had just arrived in my mailbox." The night of June 30th, I sat alone in my apartment in South Boston with everything laid out on the kitchen table like evidence at a trial: the certified copy of Dad's will, Nina's 47-page report, the quitclaim deed from Marcus Bentley, and a cream-colored invitation, embossed in navy ink. "The Raymond Vance Coastal Preservation Fund cordially invites you to our annual benefit gala. July 12th, Harbor View Hotel, Edgartown, Martha's Vineyard. Cocktails at 6 p.m., dinner and program to follow. 85 confirmed guests." The guest list read like a who's who of Cape Cod philanthropy: the president of Cape Cod 5 Bank, 2 Edgartown selectmen, 3 real estate attorneys, Margaret Hale from the Cape Cod Times, and a representative from the Massachusetts Attorney General's nonprofit division, invited by Diane herself no less, to demonstrate the fund's transparency. I picked up the framed photo of Dad from the bookshelf. He was standing on the White Crest porch, sleeves rolled, squinting into the sun, holding a paintbrush like a conductor's baton. I could almost hear him. "A house is just wood and nails, Abby, but what you build inside it, that's the legacy." At 11:47 that night, I wrote Thomas an email. "I'm not signing the quitclaim. I'll be at the gala. Let's do this the right way." He responded in 9 minutes. "Your father always said you'd know when it was time. I'll file the motion with Barnstable Probate Court on Monday. Hearing date, July 18th. I closed my laptop and looked at the table again. In 12 days, I would walk into a room where my stepmother was queen, and I would hand her an envelope that could end her reign. I had spent 4 years being the person who didn't make a scene. That era was over. I sometimes wondered whether Diane ever lay awake at night worrying that someone might look too closely. Based on what happened next, I don't think she lost a minute of sleep. On July 2nd, Meredith emailed me. The subject line was a single heart emoji. The message was not as gentle. "Mom says you haven't signed the deed yet. She's putting you on the gala guest list as a courtesy, but she really hopes you won't make this awkward for everyone. Dad would hate that. Dad would hate that." She used our dead father as a leash, and she didn't even flinch typing it. The same day, Thomas flagged something in the court filings. Marcus Bentley had filed a claim on July 1st at Barnstable Probate Court, arguing that Whitecrest was a jointly held marital asset. That because Raymond had used income earned during his marriage to Diane for property maintenance and taxes, Diane had a lawful equitable interest. It was a stretch, but it was strategic. If a judge entertained it, the case could drag on for months. Then Thomas obtained the gala's run of show from a board member he knew. The plan was surgical. After a tribute video for Raymond, Diane would take the stage to announce that the Vance family has unanimously agreed to transfer Whitecrest into the Ashford Vance Family Trust as a community coastal center. She intended to present it as a done deal, my signature already implied, in front of 85 influential witnesses. By the time the truth came out, social pressure would have cemented the narrative. But buried in that same guest list, Thomas noticed a name that made him pause. Margaret Hale, investigative reporter for the Cape Cod Times, specializing in nonprofit governance. Diane had invited her for the PR. She had no idea she'd handed us a front-row witness. She built her own stage, Thomas said over the phone that evening, and she doesn't know we're about to use it. The 7 days between July 3rd and July 10th were the quietest of my life, and the most deliberate. I worked with Thomas and Nina every evening after my regular project hours. We assembled the package, a certified copy of the amended will with Article 14.3 highlighted, Nina's notarized 47-page audit report, finalized and signed on July 7th, a single-page timeline summarizing every fraudulent transaction with dates and dollar amounts, and copies of the Ashford Creative LLC registration alongside the corresponding bank transfers. During the days, I kept my head down and finished what I'd started. I delivered the final restoration drawings for the Eastham Lighthouse to Gerald Whitmore, chairman of the Eastham Preservation Council, on July 8th, 2 days ahead of schedule. Gerald was 70, with sun-weathered hands and a voice like gravel wrapped in kindness. He studied my plans for a long time, then looked up. "You're the most meticulous architect I've ever worked with, Abigail," he said. "Your father would be proud." I nearly broke right there in his office. I didn't. I thanked him, shook his hand, and drove home. That night, I placed everything into a single cream-colored envelope, the same shade as the gala invitation. I slid the spare Whitecrest keys in first, then the documents. I sealed it with clear packing tape and wrote on the front, in my neatest handwriting, "For Diane Ashford Vance," as requested. She wanted the keys. They were in there, exactly as she'd demanded. But so was everything else. I didn't lose sleep those 7 days. For the first time in 4 years, I slept like someone who had stopped pretending that silence was peace, that compliance was love, that giving everything away was the price of belonging. The envelope sat on my nightstand like a quiet grenade. In 48 hours, I'd deliver it in person. The morning of July 12th, I boarded the Steamship Authority ferry at Woods Hole with a shoulder bag containing the sealed envelope, a fully charged phone, and the Eastham Lighthouse drawings, just in case anyone at the gala needed a reminder of what I actually did for a living. The crossing to Vineyard Haven took 45 minutes. I stood on the upper deck and watched Cape Cod shrink behind me, the wind pulling at my hair, and I thought about every ferry ride I'd taken with Dad as a kid. How he'd always buy me a cranberry juice and point out the osprey nests on the channel markers. He made everything feel safe, even open water. Harbor View Hotel in Edgartown is a white clapboard landmark from 1891, all wraparound porches and widows' walks, perched on a hill above the harbor. The gala would begin at 6, cocktails on the veranda, dinner in the main ballroom. 85 guests, bank presidents, selectmen, attorneys, philanthropists, Margaret Hale with her reporter's notebook, and Victoria Marsh from the Massachusetts Attorney General's nonprofit division, who Diane had personally invited to certify the fund's credibility. Diane's stage, Diane's crowd, Diane's night. I checked in at 4, hung my navy blazer on the back of the bathroom door, and sat on the edge of the bed holding the envelope. My phone buzzed. Thomas, texting from the next ferry. "I'm 30 minutes behind you, but heads up, Marcus Bentley just filed an emergency motion to postpone the July 18th hearing. Wants 60 more days for discovery. If the judge grants it, Diane buys herself 2 months to spin this. Tonight matters more than ever." I set the phone down, looked at the envelope, and exhaled. In 2 hours, I would walk into a room full of people who believed Diane Ashford Vance was the guardian of my father's legacy, and I would show them the truth. Or lose everything trying. 6:15. The veranda was already crowded. Linen suits, sundresses, champagne flutes catching the last of the golden light over Edgartown Harbor. A string quartet played Debussy near the railing. Everything smelled like roses and salt air and money. I stepped through the French doors and Diane found me within seconds, as though she'd had someone watching the entrance. She was radiant. Cream silk dress, pearl earrings, a smile so wide and warm you'd think she'd been counting the days until she saw me. "Abigail, you made it!" She kissed the air near my cheek and gripped my elbow, steering me toward the far corner of the veranda before I could greet anyone else. The moment we were out of earshot, the warmth evaporated. "Did you bring the keys?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Marcus has the paperwork inside. We can do this quietly during cocktails. Sign, smile, and no one needs to know the details." I held her gaze. "I brought the keys, Diane. You'll get them tonight." Something flickered behind her eyes. Relief? Maybe, or triumph. She squeezed my arm. "Good girl." She walked away, and within a minute Meredith materialized beside a group of guests near the bar, champagne in hand, gesturing toward me with a smile. "Abigail is such a sweetheart. She's going to help us turn Whitecrest into something the whole community can enjoy." I didn't correct her. Not yet. Instead, I scanned the room. Margaret Hale was at the bar, notebook open, pen moving. Victoria Marsh, mid-40s, dark blazer, no champagne, was talking to the Cape Cod 5 president near the hydrangeas. And behind the ballroom's side door, I could see Diane testing the microphone on the stage, leaning toward the event coordinator. "After the tribute video, I'll make the announcement about Whitecrest. Keep the lights on me." Thomas arrived at 6:40, caught my eye from the entrance, and gave a single, quiet nod. "Don't embarrass yourself tonight, Abigail," Diane had whispered to me in that corner. "You're here because I allowed it. Remember that." I remembered. I would remember it for the rest of the evening. At 7:30, the ballroom lights dimmed, and 85 people turned their chairs toward the projection screen. The tribute video ran 4 minutes. It opened with a photograph of my father standing in front of the Barnstable Courthouse in 1998, young and sharp-jawed, briefcase in hand. Then came images of him at Whitecrest, painting the fence, standing on the bluff, shaking hands at a groundbreaking ceremony for a dune restoration project. My father's voice, pulled from a recorded speech, filled the room. "The coastline doesn't belong to any of us. We're just its caretakers." I watched for myself in that video. I appeared once. A blurry shape in the background of a family photo from 2017, half cut by the frame. Diane and Meredith, by contrast, filled nearly every other image. Diane at Raymond's side, at Galas. Meredith as a toddler on the Whitecrest porch. A family I barely recognized, built from photographs I'd never been invited to take. When the video ended, Diane rose and walked to the stage as though stepping into a spotlight designed specifically for her. Her voice trembled. Perfectly calibrated, just enough emotion to sound authentic without losing composure. "Raymond's dream was always that Whitecrest would serve a greater purpose," she said, one hand on her heart. "And tonight, I'm proud to announce that our family, united, has decided to transfer the property into the Ashford Vance Family Trust to become a coastal preservation center open to the public." Applause filled the room. Margaret Hale looked up from her notes. Victoria Marsh nodded approvingly. Then Diane turned, found me at table 4, and extended her hand like a queen summoning a subject. "Abigail, sweetheart, would you like to come up and say a few words? We have the paperwork ready. This is your father's legacy, after all." 85 pairs of eyes turned to me. The room was silent except for the faint clink of a glass somewhere near the back. I stood up. I picked up the envelope from beside my plate, and I walked toward the stage. Diane was smiling. The kind of smile that says I've already won. She had no idea that the envelope in my hand wasn't a surrender. The stage was small, just a riser with a podium and a single microphone, but it felt enormous. The ballroom lights were angled upward, and I could see every face in the first 3 rows clearly. Benefactors, select men, Margaret Hale with her pen frozen mid-word. Diane stood beside me, still smiling, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder as though presenting a gift. I leaned into the microphone. "Thank you, Diane, for that beautiful tribute," I said. My voice was steady, steadier than I expected. My father loved Whitecrest more than any place on earth, and he was very, very specific about what he wanted for it. I paused. The room waited. "I won't be signing the quitclaim deed tonight." I let the sentence land. Somewhere near the back, a chair creaked. Whitecrest was left to me, solely to me. In my father's final will, dated March 15, 2021, and executed by his attorney and estate executor Thomas Calloway, who is here tonight. Thomas stood at table 7. He adjusted his jacket, nodded once toward the room, and remained standing. Diane's hand slid off my shoulder. The murmuring started, low, confused, spreading table by table like wind through tall grass. I turned to Diane and held out the envelope. "You asked for the keys," I said, my voice still even. "They're in here, along with something else my father left, something I think everyone in this room should know about." Diane's composure held for exactly 3 seconds. She took the envelope, tore it open, and the Whitecrest keys clattered onto the podium. Then she pulled out the documents. I watched her eyes move across the first page. The highlighted text of Article 14.3. Then the second page, Nina's one-page summary. Summary of unauthorized disbursements. Raymond Vance Coastal Preservation Fund. Total, $340,000. The color left her face in stages like a tide retreating from sand. But Diane didn't crumble. She straightened her spine and turned to the room. "This is absurd," she said, her voice pitching upward. "Abigail is clearly acting out of grief. Marcus, tell them." She scanned the ballroom for Marcus Bentley. He was already standing at table 2, jaw tight, saying nothing. Thomas was already walking toward the stage before Diane finished her sentence. He didn't rush. He climbed the riser with the careful, deliberate posture of a man who had spent 40 years standing in front of judges, and when he reached the microphone, he spoke the way my father used to, like every word had been weighed in advance. "My name is Thomas Calloway. I served as Raymond Vance's personal attorney for 23 years, and I am the court-appointed executor of his estate." He paused, letting the credentials settle. "The will is unambiguous. Whitecrest belongs to Abigail Vance. It has never been subject to any family trust, marital claim, or shared arrangement." He turned a page in the folder he'd carried to the stage. Article 14.3 of the will contains a forfeiture clause, drafted by Raymond himself, which states that any beneficiary or related party proven to have misappropriated funds from the estate, including the charitable fund bearing his name, forfeits their entire inheritance. Then came the numbers. Ashford Creative LLC, registered in Delaware, August 2022. Sole member, Meredith Vance. Thomas read each fact as though reading a court filing. 17 separate transactions over 28 months, $340,000 dispersed as consulting and event management fees to a company with no employees, no office address, no tax filings, and no documented deliverables. Meredith shot to her feet at table 3, face flushed. "That's my consulting company. I did real work." Thomas didn't raise his voice. "The LLC has produced no invoices, no contracts, and no evidence of services rendered. The funds transferred directly to your personal bank account." Silence. Absolute ringing silence filled the ballroom. Victoria Marsh, the AG representative, set her glass on the table, pulled out her phone, and stepped toward the corridor. Margaret Hale's voice recorder had been running for 5 minutes already, its small red light glowing beside her napkin. And Marcus Bentley stood, adjusted his tie, and said quietly to Diane, "I need to speak with my client privately." Then he walked out of the ballroom without looking back. Marcus walked out, and with him walked the last person willing to defend Diane Ashford Vance in a room full of witnesses. What happened next is something I've replayed in my mind more times than I can count, not because it felt good, because it felt irreversible. Diane stood at the podium, alone now, the microphone still live. The room was so quiet I could hear the harbor bell outside. She gripped the edge of the podium with both hands and did the one thing she should not have done. She kept talking. Raymond would be ashamed of you, Abigail. Her voice cracked, but not from grief. From rage. You're destroying this family for a house. No one moved. 85 people had just heard documented evidence that Diane had siphoned $340,000 from her late husband's charity, and now she was invoking his name to shame the daughter he'd specifically protected. The silence stretched for 3 long seconds. Then Gerald Whitmore, the man who'd called my lighthouse restoration work meticulous, the chairman of the Eastham Preservation Council, stood up at table 5. I've worked with Abigail for 2 years, he said, his gravel voice carrying without a microphone. She restored the Eastham Lighthouse with the kind of integrity Raymond himself would have demanded. He paused, looked directly at Diane. I think we all know who's destroying what here. Scattered applause broke out, then spread, rippling across the room like a wave finding shore. Diane grabbed Meredith by the wrist and turned for the exit. But as they passed table 3, Meredith, crying now, mascara running, said something into the still-live wireless mic clipped to the floral centerpiece. You promised no one would find out, Mom. The words rang through the speakers, clear as a bell. Margaret Hale wrote them down verbatim. Diane didn't look back. The ballroom doors closed behind them, and the string quartet, unsure of what else to do, began to play again, softly, as though hoping the music might erase what everyone had just witnessed. It wouldn't. Victoria Marsh returned from the corridor and walked straight to Thomas. My office will be requesting a full audit of the fund first thing Monday, she said, her voice low but firm. This isn't just a family matter anymore. I didn't say another word after Diane left the stage. I didn't need to. The numbers had already said everything. Thursday, July 18th. 10 in the morning, Barnstable County Probate and Family Court. I wore the same navy blazer I'd worn at the gala, not because I was making a statement, but because it was the only professional jacket I owned that didn't have paint on the cuffs. Thomas sat beside me at the petitioner's table. Nina was in the gallery row directly behind us, her laptop bag on her knees, ready if the judge asked for source documents. Diane sat on the opposite side with a new attorney, a gray-haired woman from a Hyannis firm I didn't recognize. Marcus Bentley had formally withdrawn from the case on July 15th, citing irreconcilable differences in legal strategy. Meredith was not present. The emergency motion to postpone had been denied. The Attorney General's office had filed a brief the previous week supporting the original hearing date, arguing that any delay risked further dissipation of estate assets while the fund remained under investigation. Thomas presented the case methodically. He entered into evidence the certified will, the forfeiture clause, and Nina's 47-page report, which had already been filed with the court 10 days earlier. Diane's new attorney challenged the standing of the forfeiture provision, arguing it was unusually punitive. Judge Eleanor Garrett listened, reviewed the will's language for several minutes, then removed her glasses. The decedent's intent was clear, she said. His language was precise, and the evidence of misappropriation is unambiguous. The forfeiture clause is hereby activated. She read the ruling slowly. Diane's entire inheritance share, the life insurance payout of $1.2 million still held in escrow, her equity interest in the fund, her claim to any jointly managed estate assets, was forfeited and redirected to the Preservation Fund under Thomas's management as executor. Whitecrest was confirmed as the sole property of Abigail Elaine Vance. No encumbrance, no dispute. Diane sat motionless through the ruling, her hands folded in her lap, staring at a point somewhere above the judge's head. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. When it was over, she stood, buttoned her jacket, and walked out of the courtroom without looking at me. It was the first time in 4 years that Diane Ashford Vance had nothing to say to me, and I realized, with a strange, hollow clarity, that silence was the only honest thing she'd ever given me. The article went live at 6 in the morning on Monday, July 22nd. Margaret Hale's byline ran across the top of the Cape Cod Times digital edition. Vance Foundation under state scrutiny after gala revelation. $340,000 in questionable disbursements. 2,200 words, Front page of the online edition, citing the audit report, a statement from Victoria Marsh's office, and on-the-record confirmation from Thomas that the forfeiture clause had been activated by judicial order. The article did not name me as the person who brought the evidence forward. Thomas, in his capacity as executor, was the formal complainant. I was mentioned once. Abigail Vance, the sole heir to the Whitecrest property and a licensed landscape architect specializing in historic coastal restoration. That was enough. That was more than Diane had ever allowed me to be in print. By noon, my phone had 47 unread messages. Friends, former classmates, colleagues, people I hadn't heard from in years, reaching out with some version of "I had no idea," or "I always thought something was off." Gerald Whitmore texted a single line. "Proud of you, kid." The institutional fallout was immediate. Cape Cod 5 announced the suspension of its $50,000 annual grant to the fund, pending the outcome of the Attorney General's review. 2 individual donors, both gala attendees, withdrew pledges totaling $35,000. Diane posted a Facebook status that evening. "My family is going through a difficult time. I ask for privacy." It received 12 likes and 43 comments, most of which were questions she didn't answer. Later that week, Margaret Hale called me, not for a follow-up quote, for something else entirely. "I'd heard rumors about that fund for 18 months, she said, "but no one would go on the record. No one would confirm anything. You didn't just save your house, Abigail. You gave me a source." I sat with that for a long time after I hung up. My silence for 4 years hadn't protected anyone. It had only protected Diane. 3 of those 47 messages were from Meredith. I didn't open them. Not yet. By August, the dominoes had a rhythm of their own. The Attorney General's office completed its preliminary audit in the 3rd week of the month. The conclusion was exactly what Nina's report had indicated: $340,000 in funds dispersed without legitimate basis. Diane and Meredith were ordered to repay the full amount within 120 days, or face civil charges under Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 12, Section 8, the state's charitable fraud statute. Ashford Creative LLC was ordered dissolved by the Delaware Division of Corporations. Diane was removed as chair of the fund's board of directors. Thomas was appointed interim administrator, with oversight from the AG's office. The fund, for the first time since its creation, had a financial structure that my father would have actually recognized. The personal toll was steep and specific. Diane's condominium in Brookline, valued at $890,000, was leveraged against the repayment obligation. Meredith sold her BMW X5 and a 28-foot sailboat. Combined with the forfeited inheritance of $1.2 million, the total financial loss for Diane and Meredith reached approximately $1.635 million, plus an estimated $95,000 in legal fees. The social cost was harder to quantify but impossible to miss. Diane was removed from the organizing committee of the Cape Cod Summer Arts Festival. Her membership at the Wiano Club was quietly revoked. No public statement, just a letter and a returned deposit. 2 families in her Brookline neighborhood, people she'd dined with for years, stopped extending invitations. "The money's traceable, the LLC is dissolved, and the AG's office has everything they need," Nina told me during our final meeting. "Financially, they're done." I thanked her, paid the remaining balance on her fee, and drove home through late summer traffic thinking about a word I hadn't used in 4 years. Enough. For the first time, it meant something different. Not, "I'm not enough," but, "This is enough. This is where it stops." The message came at 3:17 in the morning on a night in late August when I couldn't sleep either. Meredith's name glowed on my phone screen and I almost didn't open it. But something about the timestamp, the rawness of reaching out at 3 a.m., made me swipe. "I know you probably won't read this, but I didn't know about the LLC when Mom set it up. She told me it was legitimate consulting. I signed what she told me to sign. I'm not saying I'm innocent. I'm saying I didn't know how deep it went." I read it 4 times, sitting up in bed, the phone's blue light making my apartment feel like the bottom of a pool. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't believe her. Parts of it rang true. The way Meredith had always deferred to Diane. The way she'd been trained since childhood to nod and comply. But believing someone's confusion doesn't erase their choices. She signed every invoice. She deposited every check. The next morning, I called Nina. Is there evidence Meredith knew the LLC was fraudulent? Nina was quiet for a moment. Meredith signed every invoice. She received every payment. Whether she understood the legal implications is a question for a court, not for me. Fair enough. I thought about Meredith for days after that. 26 years old, raised under Diane's roof and Diane's rules. Never taught to question, never required to earn. If I'd grown up in that house instead of on the Whitecrest porch with Dad, would I be different? I didn't know. But I knew that understanding someone's circumstances didn't mean accepting what they'd done with them. Have you ever had someone in your life who hurt you? Not out of malice, maybe, but out of weakness? Someone you couldn't quite hate and couldn't quite forgive? I'd love to hear how you handled it. Share in the comments. I didn't respond to Meredith that night, but I saved her message. I had a feeling I'd need to read it again, when I was ready to decide what kind of sister I wanted to be. September arrived the way it always does on Cape Cod, with a sharpening of the light and a thinning of the crowds, and for the first time, the season felt like mine. Gerald Whitmore invited me to join the Eastham Preservation Council as an architectural advisor. It was a volunteer position with no salary and a title that wouldn't impress anyone at a cocktail party, but it was the first time my name appeared on any board in the Cape Cod conservation community, and it appeared because of my work, not my last name. The Cape Cod Chronicle published a feature on the Eastham Lighthouse restoration in mid-September. The article was about the building, its history, its structural challenges, the 18 months of careful work that brought it back from the edge of condemnation. My name appeared in the fourth paragraph. Abigail Vance, the project's lead architect, has earned a reputation for meticulous preservation work that balances historical integrity with modern resilience. There was no mention of the gala, the fund, or Diane. And that was exactly what I wanted. To be known for what I built, not for what almost got taken from me. My studio's phone started ringing more often after that. 3 new restoration contracts came in from Cape Cod homeowners between September and November, totaling $420,000 in projected revenue, more than double what I'd earned the previous year. I turned down 2 podcast invitations and 1 request for a magazine profile. It's a private matter, I told each of them. The courts handled it. I wasn't being modest. I was being deliberate. The story I wanted to tell with my life wasn't about revenge. It was about work and roots, and the stubborn act of building things that last. Victoria Marsh sent Thomas a letter in October, thanking him for his cooperation. Her office was reviewing oversight protocols for family-managed charitable funds in Massachusetts, using the Vance case, anonymized, as a reference study. My father's name was becoming what it should have been all along, a standard, not a prop. In October, Diane reached out, not to me directly, but through Thomas. She wanted to meet. She said she wanted to talk. I agreed, but on my terms. Thomas's office in Hyannis, Thomas present as mediator, no attorney from Diane's side, no Meredith, no recordings from her end. If she wanted a conversation, it would happen in a room with clear walls and clear rules. We met on a Thursday afternoon. Diane looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe she just looked her age for the first time. No pearls, no silk. A gray cardigan buttoned to the collar, her hands wrapped around a paper coffee cup she never drank from. She cried. I expected that. She said, I only wanted to protect what Raymond built. I'd expected that too. I let her finish. Then I spoke, and I'd rehearsed this not for drama but for precision, because I knew if I didn't get the words exactly right, I'd either say too little or too much. Diane, you didn't protect what he built. You tried to take what he left for me. I don't hate you. But I won't let you have access to my life the way you've had for the last 4 years. If you want a relationship, it starts with honesty, not control. Then I laid out 3 conditions. First, All communication regarding property, finances, or estate matters would go through Thomas. No direct contact. Second, the fund repayment must be completed in full before any family gathering of any kind. Third, I would not attend any event organized under the Vance family name until the fund was restructured with independent oversight. Diane listened. She didn't argue. When I finished, she said quietly, almost to herself, "You sound just like your father." "Thank you," I said. "That's the best thing you've ever said to me." A boundary isn't a punishment, and I wanted her to understand that. It's the price of staying in someone's life when trust has to be rebuilt from nothing. I responded to Meredith's message in November, 2 months after she'd sent it. I kept it short. "I read your message. I believe you didn't understand the full picture, but you benefited from it, and that's something you have to own. If you want to talk, I'm open to it, but not as your sister who forgives everything, as someone who expects you to be honest." She wrote back within an hour, and we agreed to meet at a cafe in Falmouth, halfway between us. Neutral ground, no history attached to the walls. The conversation lasted 2 hours. Meredith looked different. Thinner, no makeup, her nails bitten short. She held her coffee with both hands like she was cold, even though the cafe was warm. She talked more honestly than I'd ever heard her talk about anything. "Mom always told me what to think," she said. "I never questioned it. That's not an excuse. It's something I have to fix." I didn't disagree, and I didn't rush to reassure her, the way I might have a year ago. Instead, I told her the truth as I saw it. "We can build something new, Meredith, but it has to be built on things we actually choose, not on things Mom decided for us." She nodded. I suggested she start seeing a therapist, not as a condition, but as a starting point. I gave her a name. "This isn't for me," I said. "This is for you." Then, near the end, Meredith told me something I'd never known. 2 weeks before Dad died, he called her. She was 22 then, still living at home. He said, "Take care of your sister, Mare. She's going to need you." Meredith's voice broke. "I failed him. I failed both of you." I reached across the table and held her hand. The first time in 4 years I'd touched my sister without a wall between us. I didn't forgive her that day. But I opened a door. What she does with it is up to her. I drove to Whitecrest at the end of November, when the Cape was empty and the wind had teeth. The locksmith met me at 9 in the morning. I watched him change every lock on every door. Front, back, side porch, the basement hatch Dad used to call the submarine entrance. When he handed me the new keys, I held them in my palm and felt their weight the way you feel the weight of something you thought you'd lost forever. I hadn't set foot inside in 4 years. The house was intact but neglected in the way that only apathy can produce. The porch boards I'd replaced with Dad in the summer of 2018 were warped from moisture. The fence posts we'd painted together were peeling down to bare wood. The garden my mother had planted before I was born, the one Dad kept alive for 2 decades, had gone to thistle and crabgrass. Diane hadn't maintained any of it. She'd used the house the way she'd used everything, as a set piece, not a home. I hired a small crew from Truro. And then I did something I hadn't done since I was 17. I picked up a brush and started painting the fence myself. It took 3 days. My shoulders ached, my hands blistered and then calloused. And on the 3rd evening, while pulling up a rotted plank on the porch, I found a wooden box wedged under the floorboards. A cigar box, weathered but sealed with packing tape. Inside was a handwritten letter, dated March 10th, 2021. 5 days before Dad amended his will, 3 months before he died. "Abby, if you're reading this, it means you've found your way back. I knew you would. The house is yours. Not because it's valuable, but because you're the only one who understands what it means. Don't let anyone tell you what your legacy should be. Build it yourself. Love, Dad." I sat on the porch where he used to sit, holding his letter in his handwriting, and I cried for the first time since the funeral. Not because I was sad, because he'd known. He'd known all of it. What Diane would try, how long I'd wait, and that I'd come back when I was ready. He'd planned for everything, except how much I'd miss him while I figured it all out. By January 2026, the fund had a new spine. Thomas completed the restructuring over the holidays, and when he walked me through the final documents in his Hyannis office, I could see the relief on his face, the kind that comes not from victory, but from a promise finally kept. The Raymond Vance Coastal Preservation Fund retained its original name. Dad had chosen it, and no one else's hands would change that. But everything underneath was rebuilt. Gerald Whitmore was installed as the new board chair, bringing with him 40 years of nonprofit governance and a zero-tolerance policy for undocumented disbursements. Nina Aldridge agreed to serve as part-time treasurer on a transparent, contracted basis. The fund's first-ever financial officer with actual forensic credentials. And the Attorney General's office mandated an independent audit every 12 months, conducted by a rotating external firm. Cape Cod 5 reinstated its $50,000 annual grant, contingent on the new audit provisions, a condition the bank had never imposed before, and one that Thomas welcomed without hesitation. Accountability, he told me, isn't a burden. It's a foundation. Then came the part that surprised even Thomas. I decided to convert Whitecrest's ground floor into a summer residency program for architecture students. 4 fellows, 6 weeks, working on real preservation projects along the Outer Cape under professional mentorship. I called it the Vance Fellowship. The first cohort would arrive in June. I kept the second floor as private space. A bedroom, a drafting table by the window, the porch where Dad's letter had waited under the floorboards. That wasn't a sacrifice. It was a design choice. The same kind Dad had taught me to make. How to share a building without losing the room that matters most. My father left me a house. I told Thomas the day we signed the fellowship's charter. I'm turning it into a school. I think he'd like that. Thomas smiled, the first real, unguarded smile I'd seen from him in 7 months. He'd like it very much, he said, but he'd still want you to repaint that fence every summer. I laughed. It was the first time I'd laughed about Dad without it hurting. June 2026. 1 year to the week since Diane's phone call. I stood on the Whitecrest porch with a mug of coffee, watching 4 architecture students from 3 different universities measure fence posts in the early morning light. They were arguing about joist spacing, the kind of argument Dad would have loved, the kind he used to settle by handing you a level and saying, "Don't guess. Measure." My studio in South Boston now had 2 employees, Kara, a structural drafting specialist, and Leo, a recent graduate from Wentworth who reminded me of myself at 23, all precision and quiet stubbornness. Annual revenue for 2025 had come in at $680,000, up from $310,000 the year before. I'd signed a contract in April to restore a historic church in Provincetown, the kind of project that would have made Dad pull out a chair and ask me to walk him through every elevation. Meredith and I saw each other once a month. We weren't close. Not the way sisters in movies are close, but we were honest, which was better. She'd been in therapy since December. In March, she was hired as an events coordinator at a Boston nonprofit that matched low-income families with housing assistance. It was the first job she'd ever gotten without Diane's name on the application. When she told me about it over coffee, her eyes were bright in a way I'd never seen before. Not the brightness of performance, but of someone discovering, for the first time, that they could stand on their own. Diane had repaid $280,000 of the $340,000 she owed. The remaining $60,000 was on a court-approved installment plan. She did not come to Whitecrest. I did not invite her. Neither of us pretended that was temporary. Thomas visited every July. He'd sit on the porch, drink coffee, and tell me stories about Dad, cases they'd argued, jokes they'd shared, the time Raymond accidentally filed a motion in the wrong county and drove 90 miles to fix it before the clerk noticed. "You're the closest thing I have to a father now," I told him once. He set down his mug and looked at the ocean. "Your father would say I'm just the messenger." I didn't win a war. I won the right to stop fighting one. The night of July 12th, 2026, exactly 1 year since the gala, I sat at the drafting table in the upstairs bedroom at Whitecrest and wrote a letter I could never send. "Dear Dad, I found the letter under the porch. I found the clause in the will. I found Thomas when I was ready. You planned for everything, except how much I'd miss you while figuring it all out. Whitecrest is a school now. There are kids here learning to measure joists the way you taught me. They don't know your name yet, but they will. One of them, a girl from Springfield who's never seen the ocean before this summer, asked me yesterday why the porch faces east instead of south. I told her what you told me. Because the morning light is honest. It shows you everything. The cracks, the beauty, all of it. She wrote it down in her notebook. You would have liked her. I didn't let them take the house, and I didn't let them take me. I think you knew I wouldn't. That's why you left me the keys. Not just to the door, but to the choice. Meredith is trying. I don't know if she'll make it all the way, but she's walking in the right direction, and I think that matters. You asked her to take care of me. She didn't. But maybe I can take care of the space between us until she's strong enough to meet me in it. I love you. I miss your handwriting and your terrible coffee, and the way you hummed when you were reading contracts. Abby. I folded the letter, walked downstairs, and placed it inside the cigar box under the porch, next to his. The next morning, I woke early and walked to the beach. The tide was out, the sand firm and cold, the sky the color of unfinished steel. I walked for a long time without thinking about Diane, or the gala, or the courtroom, or any of it. I just walked. And the ocean did what it always does. Kept going, indifferent and enormous, and exactly where it was supposed to be. The horizon didn't look different, but I did. Back in Boston, I reorganized my studio on a Sunday afternoon in mid-July. The kind of quiet, methodical work that calms me the way other people are calmed by music. I hung 3 things on the wall behind my drafting table. The first was a framed copy of the opening page of Dad's will. Not the forfeiture clause, not the property section, but the preamble, where he'd written in his own hand, I leave these things not as possessions, but as responsibilities. May they be carried with integrity. The second was a photograph of the Eastham Lighthouse after restoration, taken from the bluff at sunset. Proof that broken things can be made whole if someone cares enough to learn how. The third was the charter for the Vance Fellowship, signed by its first 4 students in June, their names written in careful block letters like a kind of promise. That evening, I wrote Thomas an email. I've decided to stop attending any event that uses Vance Family as a label for anything other than the fund. From now on, I'm Abigail, an architect, a fellow, a friend. Not Raymond's daughter, not Diane's stepdaughter. Just me. He replied before I'd closed the laptop. That's the most Raymond Vance thing you've ever said. I smiled at the screen, shut it, and walked outside. South Boston in July is loud and bright and unapologetic. Car horns and laughter and someone grilling on a rooftop 3 buildings over. I stood on the sidewalk and let the city move around me for a minute, feeling something I didn't have a clean word for. Not happiness, exactly. Not relief. Something more like alignment. The sense that the life I was living and the person I was had finally caught up to each other. I used to think legacy was something you inherited. Now I know it's something you build. One boundary, one blueprint, one honest choice at a time. That's my story. If any part of it felt familiar, the silence, the pressure, the moment you realized you deserved better, I hope this gives you permission to protect yourself the way my father protected me. Not with anger, but with preparation and principle. If this story stayed with you, please hit like and subscribe. And check the description below. There's another story there about someone who was told they'd never be enough. They proved everyone wrong. I think you'll want to hear it. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourselves and your boundaries.